Welcome to the conversation with Al McFarland. I'm your host, Al McFarland. So instead of presenting you a live program today, I'm sharing with you one of my favorite episodes, a show that shows you how we've molded the show that you've come to know and love. And while you're enjoying this show, I'm going to be working with my team to make the program even more informative, more insightful, and even more inspiring. And if you haven't already, I'd like you to show your support for the conversation with Al McFarland by subscribing to the Inside News YouTube channel. This way you'll get alerted about and never miss new episodes, show clips, and special features only available on the Inside News channel. And you can find us on YouTube at Inside News MN. To make it easier, I've got a link in the description on this video. Well, thank you again for all your support this year. I can't wait for you to see all that we are preparing for 2023. Now, my friend, sit back and enjoy this conversation with Al McFarland. I'm Al McFarland. Welcome to The Conversation with Al McFarland. Today is Thursday, October 20th, 2022. I'm glad to be here and glad to be in company with you. Thank you for joining the program, being a part of it, listening, watching now or later, however you connect with us. We are trying to figure out, and actually we figured it out, we just got to keep doing it, reflect how we can be together across a variety of platforms. So we thank our partnership with the National Newspaper Publishers Association, NNPA, the Black Press of America. We're being streamed live at Black Press USA YouTube channel. We're being streamed live at Black Press USA Facebook page as well. And of course, we're going through the McFarland media platforms, including Inside News, our Inside News and Al McFarland Twitter pages, and the Al McFarland LinkedIn page. So a wonderful array of opportunities to engage wherever you are. We'd love to know that you're there, and we invite you to share, to let your friends know that we're live, and we invite them to join us again, to be in community, to be in conversation. Thursday is a particularly fun, I think, inspiring show because we don't have a script. We simply have friends show up that have a scheduled time or interest or passion or something they're mad about, and they want to talk about it. And we're here to listen to each other. I think that's how you build community. The name, we call this Companions, comes from books I read from Aikwe Arma. And one of the books was called The Way of the Companions. And he talks about the long work, the multi-generational work of authoring futures that celebrate our humanity, that move us away from patriarchy and its twin evil, white supremacy. That's a phrase I picked up from our guest from South Africa. I think that was Tuesday. Dr. Peterson joined us from Johannesburg or Cape Town, South Africa. She's come on in, Brenda. I see you bring Brenda in.
No, I was saying it was Friday, Healing Circle.
Healing Circle Friday, yeah. But one thing she said, I looked at her notes, she talked about the twin evils of patriarchy and of white supremacy. And so our thought here is that what we're engaged in is conversations that let us examine, and challenge how we react to, respond to, ignore or get beyond or not be damaged by those systems and processes whose motive has always been, it seems to me, to deny our humanity, to write us off, and to extract both from our minds, our bodies, and the lands we occupy, the wealth that exists for the power and the benefit of the European few, and at the expense of the rest of the world, our people, the many. So, and I love that she mentioned that, because Angela Rose, who's here, and I keep bringing this back to her, talked about the patriarchy. And that's something that I just haven't gotten, that I think is an important conversation. And so any chance I get to bring it back, I'm going to bring it back around just to go and sit in that space and examine what that means and what it has meant and what a future means. Well, Angela's here right now. Angela, good afternoon. Good to see you again. How are you?
Good afternoon. I'm doing well.
Well, great. Well, so you heard the opening remarks there. I was making reference to the power, the benefit, the beauty of us being together. I love this. I thank you for being a part of it. I adore your voice, your vision, your work. Of course, I adore your family. Your mom and dad are friends and heroes of mine. And, when I see you, I see them. So you're my hero as well. And
Thank you.
Have the best feelings and so much pride in being with you, but also listening to you, because you be dropping it.
I was getting ready to say powerful statements coming out of that young mind.
telling it. So that's cool. Well, so let's start there, Angela. I'm going to throw out this whole thing of, what does it mean? Why do we need to examine this notion of patriarchy? And if I told you that Dr. Peterson, the sister from South Africa, Friday, talked about the twin evils of white supremacy and patriarchy as the source of violence, and which it's in the article that Brenda wrote, violence and abuse, I think. Those were the two things she attributed that to. I'll go back and check to be sure. But so what does that trigger in you, in your study, your research? Angela, what do you think?
Yes, no, Black women particularly, there's this term that Kimberly Crenshaw coined in the legal framework initially, is intersectionality. And so with the original work that Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw did, she was focused in on how Black women are almost at like a double jeopardy when it comes to filing for discrimination cases, right? So if you're a Black woman, this was in the original framework that Kimberly Crenshaw put out in her marginalization in the law work. And it's, if a Black woman were to, let's say, try to get a job at Ford, right? Ford Power Company or whatever group. And they said, well, we don't discriminate based on gender because we have white women that we hire. And we don't discriminate based on race because we have Black men that we hire. But that company has a history of not hiring Black women. The case that a Black woman could make for discrimination doesn't exist within the law. Right, because it's either gender discrimination or race discrimination within the law. So that was like the first inklings of like intersectionality that have been expanded so much to discuss how marginalized identities don't fit within frameworks of institutions and then don't fit to like get justice. So we aren't seen. Black women aren't seen. Maybe our race is seen, maybe our gender is seen, but the way that racism and patriarchy play on our bodies, that specific discrimination, that specific oppression is not legible within a lot of institutions or within where Kimberly Crenshaw was looking was the law. And that's been expanded in so many ways, this idea of intersectionality, that there are folks who hold identities that are uniquely impacted by misogynoir, which is, what Black women are impacted by. So, I think about even this last week, I saw multiple debates, right? Debate with Stacey Abrams, debate with Val Demings, debates with Black women who are running for office. And it's very unique, I think, that there is a certain term that's attached to Black women who are powerful, who are concise, who are, very strong in their presentation. and they're called unlikable, and they're called what was the thing that Stacey Abrams and Val Demings, they were saying mean, that they were being aggressive in those debates. And this idea that this is like very unique to Black women, particularly, that we are balancing the hyper masculinity that is attached to us, because we've historically been defeminized, not seen as women, but seen as, you know, extension. Or there's an idea that our bodies, our phenotypes are masculine. And so we're aggressive, right? We're aggressive when we are saying what's happening, what's going on, what we believe. And so, you know, like, I felt like that was one of the things that I really got out of this last week of debates, particularly looking at Stacey Abrams, who was poised, graceful, you know, powerful from my view. And then going on social media and people saying that Stacey was aggressive. I was like, I didn't see that.
Angela, they called the first lady the angry Black woman. You have to remember that. They used that for 8 years because she stood up for herself.
And I was looking at past pictures of Michelle Obama, and they kept on talking. You know, I remember growing up where people would keep on talking about her arms, right? And that her arms were so bulky and so this or that. And I looked at some pictures of Michelle Obama and I said, bulky where? You know, she looked like she's toned. Yes. I mean, we all know she loves to do push-ups. Like, we all do know this because it's part of her program while she was first lady. But it did not look anything like the caricature that was portrayed of her, you know.
And she looked beautiful in sleeveless dresses.
Always.
And the minute she started wearing them, then, you know, here comes Biden, Jill Biden, and it was okay.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sorry.
No, but you're absolutely right. And like, that is just, it goes to show how our bodies are viewed through a specific lens, right? How the things that maybe it's because I'm around Black women all my life, right? I don't see that as a threat. I don't see that as ugly. I don't see that as aggressive or anything at all. Like, I see it as a beautiful Black woman's body. I mean, once we get to the point where we stop talking about people's bodies, okay, that's a side one. Like, maybe it shouldn't be a news item, someone's body. But, you know, like, to actually see folks for who they are, it's like, there is a value attached to how you look in America. We can say this for a fact, right? Pretty privilege is a real thing, right? If you are a beautiful young woman in Miami or New York, you are able to navigate spaces without paying. You're able to navigate into spaces, into connections that, you know, not everyone is. But the flip side of that is that there are expectations that are associated with it, and where your body is your value, not your mind or what you can contribute to that space, right? And so that's why it's always important to, yes, note things like pretty privilege, note things like when you're a dark-skinned Black woman, there are even establishments that will refuse you service just because of how you look and your skin color, right? Or, you know, there are jobs, and this is where the Crown Act comes in. There are jobs that don't want 4C hair. They'll refuse, you know, you a client-facing job if you have 4C hair, natural hair that is associated, or even dreadlocks, right, that are associated with being dirty or ugly or something like that. So it's really important for Black women to raise these issues, and also our Black brothers too, to raise these issues too, because it impacts all of us. What is unique about the Crown Act that a lot of sororities, historically Black sororities, are pushing, the NAACP is pushing, the Urban League is pushing. What is unique about it is that it's about hair. And what do we know about Black women's hair? That historically, you almost sometimes didn't get a job if you didn't have straight hair, if you didn't have it relaxed. And now studies are coming out that consistent use of relaxers, right, can impact your chances of getting ovarian cancer and different cancers as well. So this is not just the superficial, but also your real health is impacted by the use of some of these chemicals. And yet some women are willing, they don't care about the long-term impacts because they need a job today, right? And so that's why the Crown Act is so important, that we can show up how we want to, how we need to authentically without harming ourselves.
I see Dr. Irma has joined us, and also Brother Maestre Yoji Sena has joined us from Bahia. Good afternoon, my friends. Good to see you both. Dr. Irma was just talking about that we had a great conversation with someone Dr. Peterson. I think you met her when you were in South Africa recently. And
Yes.
Brenda has written a wonderful story about her interview on the program last Friday. I just put that in the chat. And if you open it up, you'll see the story. And I wanted to actually read a couple of lines out of it to move this conversation forward. One of the things that I started with Dr. Irma was remembering and connecting Angela's reference to the challenge of matriarchy, of patriarchy, combined, amplified by racism in the world, in
Right.
institutions. And Dr. Peterson spoke directly to that in her comments Friday on the Healing Circle. She talked about the twin evils of white supremacy and patriarchy. And so I wanted to bring that conversation forward because I know when I heard that, it reminded me of what Angela had talked about on several occasions over the past. And I pulled the article up. It's a great piece. Brenda, good job. Excellent reporting. And I'm going to read a couple of paragraphs out of it. It says, she operates a shelter called South African Family and Faith Initiative. And it's intended to provide shelter for women who are victims of abuse. And one of the things she said first about in the article, I think it was in this article, was that for a lot of women, their exposure to Black men is an exposure that is marred by or characterized by violence, by abuse. And so for children, their knowledge of what a man and who and how a man operates is colored by an experience of violence. So that's tragic, number one. And so she says, I had a calling when I was very young, holding fast to the belief that we must nurture people. In my teenage years, it was clear that I was supposed to work with men who abused their intimate partners, and that I had to work with religious leaders on the faith dimensions of gender-based violence, patriarchy, the practice, and the common exclusionary practice of male-dominated religious leadership that is still in place today. And one more paragraph, a couple of places down, she says, let's see. The honor of women and children is the foundation of a healthy society. Our sacred teachings compel us to take care of women and children and firmly uphold the principle of equality. To violate the most vulnerable members of our society is to spit in the face of God. In all congregations, there are survivors and perpetrators. It is our moral responsibility to reflect seriously on how we can support the struggle of women and children for full dignity in our homes, in our communities, and in our religious institutions, and to treat each other with respect. We cannot turn a blind eye to domestic violence, and we cannot deny that it exists. Just a powerful and clear statement about something that is, we've normalized and routinized, so we don't talk about it. Irma, what you think? Unmute, please.
This is something that, of course, is part of the work that I've been doing for about 3 decades now, or not more. Domestic violence was one of the issues that I tackled in my ethnography, Women of Belize, Gender and Change in Central America. And since 1991, when I did the research for that, 1996 was when it was published. I finished a dissertation in 93. I have been serving as an expert witness for people seeking asylum on the basis of gender violence, domestic violence, both in Suriname and Central America. So I write expert testimonies documenting the conditions, the culture of patriarchy, the kind of violence that happens is perpetrated against women. And now that work has extended to me making the case for people who are LGBTQ. For example, in Belize, up until about 3 years ago, it was written into the Constitution that same-sex relationships were criminal in the Constitution. And the person who's been the main advocate for that lives a life where they have to have protection. They're afraid to go out of their house. And so this whole notion of patriarchy, is still with us. And we have to understand that when we talk about men, particularly Black men, asking to have their rights, the question is, are they asking for a new kind of right, or are they asking for patriarchal rights?
Break that down more, if you would. That's the point that I want to get to exactly.
Well, I think one of the challenges when we talk about the historical trauma that both Black men and Black women have suffered, under the conditions of enslavement, we know that men were robbed of what were considered conventional things, taking care of their family, being able to have the financial status, because that is the dynamics of patriarchy. When we move away from that, how much of our own sort of African heritage, which is, of course, polygamous, okay, until Christianity came in, most cultures have a rule for polygamy rather than monogamy. But when we talk about that, we need to adopt, we need a new way of interacting and dealing with each other. The question is, what is the model? Is the model a polygamous model where men can have multiple wives? Is the model a Western monogamous model in which men have one wife, but they dominate? Remember, up until the early 1920s or 30s, women could not inherit property. They were considered property. I just finished looking at a novel written, an adaptation of Jane Eyre, written by Charlotte Bronte 175 years ago. And my talk was, what does it mean to look at this with a Black feminist lens? And the question really becomes, is the issue, the mad woman and the addict is this wife who is herself property. Mr. Rochester is angry because he feels like he got a raw deal. He didn't get the wife he thought he was going to get. He got the money, but not the wife. And my question was, is the wife in the attic mad because she's mentally unstable? Or is she mad because she's been locked up in an attic like she's a piece of property that he can sort of just put her away because she's not convenient? And so those questions about what should be the relationship between men and women, between Black men and women? Is it merely replicating what is in the dominant culture, or is it trying to invent something new? And what does that new thing look like? And I don't think we're there yet. I think we've drunk the Kool-Aid of Western patriarchal culture, and that we struggle with having to deal with our own oppression as a collective, as a group, and then having to think about or try and imagine new kinds of relationships that are outside of that oppressive patriarchal model.
Let me bring in Brother Yoji Sena, who's joining us from Bahia. Yoji, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing the best that I can in this minute. I had a rough evening last night with my son, but I am here. I'm resilient. I've been thinking about all of this and that you guys are talking, but I have a very difficult time to concile my thoughts about where we are talking about renegating patriarchy, but and not understand that this patriarchy that we talk about, it's um, intrinsically linked to Christian religion, and why we do not also question the renouncement of that belief in the Black community, into a return to our origins, you know. So that is my my question, you know, because there is this strong attachment and defense of Christianity on Black community, but at the same time, there are question patriarchy. So, for example, if our religion, Candomblé, Santerio, however you want it to be called, the religion of our ancestors, has been matriarchal. The who rules are women. And in many cases, when they are men, they are LGBTQ. So I think we need to do some sort of really thinking through all of those uh, questioning of the status quo of inequality that are centered and has been historically justified on Christianity.
Care to respond to that, either Angela or Irma?
I agree. I think that Judeo-Christianity has certainly interrupted and introduced concepts and ways of behaving and ideas about relationships. But I think also we need to look at least what we know of traditional African culture, whether it's as it's practiced today, or as it was practiced in the past. And I would go to the woman king, because I think that as powerful as that movie is, there is one element in there where the question is raised: why is it that the women who are, in fact, the warriors, they cannot have spouses, they cannot have children, but the men can't? They can.
Well, I understand that the movie was written and produced by two white women, so lose value to me even bring that as a parameter of anything. It is a story that is sold to us, but based on the narrative still of the dominant race.
Yoshi, she did address that, and she addressed it through scriptures. She used Ephesians, women, you submit and whatever. And she has 9 denominations that she deals with. And Dr. B was saying, Dr. Bravada Garadak and Sonia said, how did you get 9 denominations together to think about women not having to go through this? She was really moved because everyone that came in, or most of them that came into the shelter with their children, were Black women.
You're talking about Dr. Peterson. It took
Dr.
me a
Peterson, yeah.
minute to be on track
Yeah.
with you here, but go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said that at the beginning. I said she did address it, but she addressed it through scriptures, and it was powerful. It was like, whoa, I hadn't thought of this. And then she questioned the religious leaders by saying, why are you continuing to preach these themes? You're not reaching the people. And it was all tied into how women have historically been treated, and especially in the motherland.
Well, this is questionable too, because you can mention Queen Zinga, you know. Um,
Oh, I know, but I'm saying that's where she came from.
With
That was
Dr.
her
Peterson,
core.
Dr. Peterson, their
Listen,
work,
for
yeah.
example, I am here right now, present in a place um, that those tradition has not been broken. So the Ifa religion, it is continuously since slavery time. We do not need to research in books to understand it. It's alive. It's alive. You
And
know,
what is the
there is
status of
houses of
women?
worship that were founded 200 years ago, still during the time of slavery. You know, so
And there's this mindset, Yogi, that you rape your mistress on a Saturday night and you sit in church on Sunday.
yeah,
And
but I'm sorry, I'm not.
oh no,
I would
that's
like to
okay.
say, uh,
And excuse
I
me,
also
Dr. Irma,
identify a
I
little bit of
interrupted you. I'm
ethnocentrism.
sorry.
I identify a little bit of ethnocentrism, which I explain for that. Uh, African Americans think they are the center of the diaspora world, and they think only and they project that to the other communities. So here we are, uh, the only country that is more black people after Nigeria is in Brazil.
Agree.
We are
Absolutely.
54% of a population of 210 million people. So a lot of those truths that you guys have for sure, it's not reality here.
Then could you, Yogi, talk about the reality of Black women in Brazil? Because I don't disagree with you. I think we've drunk the Kool-Aid of American central, cultural ethnocentrism, and that we think that our experience as Black people is universal, and I know it's not. But my question is, some critiques of what is happening in Brazil have come from Brazilian women. So what is the status of Black women, in
Well,
the religion, in the country, and in the
patriarchy
relationships
is
with men?
worldwide and Christianity is worldwide. In the same way that I mentioned that here we have an unbroken tradition of Catholic religion, we are heavily influenced by Christianity. Uh, most as far as I know, those cases of domestic violence perpetrated towards Black women are in Christian families.
All
Well,
right,
that you
what,
know, but I
Yogi?
think
I didn't hear it.
I think Dr. Peterson was, by her intention of assembling a variety of faith leaders, saying that uh, the same phenomena occurred in Hindu and Muslim and Christian and other denominations as well. That's why she thought she could, and she did, in fact, assemble leaders in 9 different faith traditions, not all of them Christian. And so there is the question of the universal attitude that devalues and categorizes, women in a certain way. That that's what we're talking about now, I think. So it's not. So your experience, Yogi, may be that since Brazil is a Christian country, not like the U.S. is, you know, uh, that's where you see the problems, but it's not limited to Christians alone. I don't think that's the point.
No, of
And I
course
could
there
say,
might be, but it is
yeah.
is as far as I context that I have with people in general. As I say, in Candomblé, that is how African religion is called here. It is matriarchal, so men have a secondary uh, position. They are kind of counselors, you know, but the families of Candomblé, I don't have notice of widespread abuse, right? Or to be a feature of families that belongs to Candomblé that is abused. Because one of the things Candomblé is very harmonious in everything. Candomblé is a religion that has a place for example, LGBTQI people historically. is respected. There are Orishas, there are both sexes, So I think the root of this is Christianity. Even though in the other lands that can be Hindu, whatever, it still is highly influenced by Christianity because they were colonized by Christian nations.
I mean, but in that
Also,
case, that
the
means
idea
that
of universal, it is very, I don't agree very much. The word Catholic, it means universal in Greek, right? And when something is universal, it already suffocated diversity.
I
Wow.
can't speak to what is happening in Brazil, but I can tell you that when I was in India in 2018, one of the things that was happening in the newspaper was the fact that women were being excluded from praying at the temples because if they were in their cycle, they were considered unclean. That idea is not a Christian idea. It is something that is found in many religions that are not influenced by Christianity. And I think it's this sense that yes, there are elements in which women are considered to be leaders, and lineality actually is dominant. The question is what happens out, how has that been transformed in the contemporary space? And how does it impact the relationships? Because the sacred space, there it may be, but then once women move outside of that, and I'm not talking about contemplate in general, I'm just asking the question, what happens in the spaces that are non-sacred, that are secular? I think that's really the question for me.
Okay. I have heard that Indian women walk a few steps behind the man, right? But I think one thing in common of all you saying of those religions, and then when I mention Christianity, I'm not living outside Islam, and I'm not living outside Judaism and Hinduism. They are religions because they are institutions. Candomblé is spirituality. There is no central institution that determines, is the tradition. And Candomblé are generally like little tribes or bigger families. So it's very more nuclear than institutional. So again, what I see is these universal ideas being thinking that they are really universal, where each place has different flavors. And in many cases, people are wishful thinking or assuming or presuming upon other cultures based on the view they have of their own belly button. That is what ethnocentrism, where we are the center. We believe this to be the center of the human thought in many ways,
I think what I would say to that, I mean, I don't disagree with you, is that we all sort of we call it navel gazing in anthropology, but
Yes.
I think
that's what I studied.
What we have to, what we have to address is the fact that where there are cultural institutions like education that our children go through, that people go through, that those institutions were designed to socialize people in a particular way. And unless there's something outside of that that gives people an alternative vision, people drink the Kool-Aid. And so it takes a lot of effort to sort of unpack that, to deconstruct it. If you have an alternative cultural institution that is not within that sort of dominant hegemonic culture, people come up with different values and ideas. But we all have to recognize that we've all been sort of socially conditioned, both educationally. If one embraces certain religions, as you say, they are institutions and they come with their own baggage. And then the question is, how do we step outside of that? What are the pathways to moving outside of that?
And how many women, Yoji, in Brazil lead their flock? When we look at religions in the United States, how many
The
women
difference here is that
are at the head?
New Pentecostal Christianity here is on the rise, where in the United States is in decline. So, for example, our present political situation, it is a big imbroglio going on among now between the Catholics and the evangelicals. So the evangelicals tend to be talking about policies of customs and morality, where the Catholics now are being they are outraged by the usage of religion as a political tool. So last week there was the festivity of Our Lady of Aparecida, that is kind of the patron saint of Brazil, which is a black Madonna. And
Interesting.
Bolsonaro tried to hijack that event, and they have, but basically the basilica was invaded by followers of Bolsonaro with beer mugs and beer cans, and supposedly being evangelical, and they are antagonizing the archbishop at that moment. So uh, historically has been Catholicism that oppress us, and nowadays is the evangelicals that are brainwashing the people. So candomblé is now more than ever, because the Catholic had an attitude seemingly of tolerance to it, where historically here in Brazil, the black organizations were hidden inside of beneficent associations in the Catholic Church. Now, uh, the evangelical don't provide that place for us. So uh, it's constant, the news of candomblé temples being invaded and destroyed and profaned by evangelicals. So almost is like, for example, here presently now people say that Lula is a thief or this and that, and the other one talks about Christianity and moral and custom policies based on Christianity, but he favored guns. And last week he just mentioned of his tendencies of pedophilia, and so between the two, I would stick with the Catholic, you know, that's more ambiguous in this sense, but I still recognize that, is is a different flavor, of the same kind of thing. I Time is passing. It has been passed to me. I have gone through several religions as in my youth. I've been sing. I sang Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. I've been on Buddhism. I've been to Islam. I've been to several evangelical churches. Of course, uh, and when I went to Jamaica, because also for a moment I called myself to be Rasta. I got there and I was like, no, you know,
Hmm.
I one the place of Jamaica compared to where I'm come from, then is me being ethnocentristic. Uh, is overrated. Sorry, Al.
No, it's fine. Go ahead.
It was okay when we were growing up, though, Yoshi.
Yeah. No, and
We
to me,
had
part
some
of my
strong
identity was based
churches.
on Rasta and the culture of Jamaica. How I
Yeah,
created my identity as an adult was embracing the idea of social justice that I learned through Bob Marley,
right.
right? But I realized then when I got there that what Bob Marley was talking about Rasta was an elevated form of Rasta, but down the ground is different. They are very patriarchal, retrograde. They separate women from men in their worships, you know, and I believe in inclusion, uh, with one keeping their own strong identities, but I believe that I have the right of my beliefs as well. Other people do, and I also believe that I don't have the right, neither the other players have the right to convince me otherwise, that their form of thinking is better. So that is one thing, for example, that Candomblé don't have. We don't try to convert anybody. We don't proselytize. And we accept people from other religions without them renounce their original religion. So here you can be Christian, a Catholic, and Candomblé. You can be Jewish and Candomblé. You can be Islam and Candomblé. Candomblé don't exclude you where you came from. It embraces. Because in certain way, it's something much older than any of those religions. You know, Candomblé at least remonts to 8,000 years old. So it's in the borderline of prehistory.
What I like about Brazil and a lot of the Brazilian colleagues that I've interacted with is the term of spirituality. And I think there's a lot of young folk in America that don't have the same confidence in saying the language of I'm a spiritualist, right? I believe in connecting with my ancestors, right? What I find folks usually say over here, unlike Brazil, is, you know, oh, I grew up in the church, you know, like something, you know, kind of more vague like that.
Like what I just said.
Right. Like I grew up in the church, but I believe in like my connection to the ancestors and to the earth. And, you know, I believe in a greater power. You hear that a lot, but I do hear from, you know, my colleagues in Brazil, a little bit more language around spirituality and a more investigation into, you know, candomblé or Ifa or voodoo, like what we say here, these West African religion descendants or West African spiritualist descendants. And yeah, like the church, the Catholic Church, they've done particularly a lot of work in South America, Central America, Brazil, not as much in America, but in North America and like the United States. But the Catholic Church that I grew up in does do this, where it's enculturated, where we have West African traditions within our Mass. So you'll have like maybe African drums playing, or you'll have like in Brazil, you know, like Black Madonnas or, you know, Anastasia, right? And one of the icons or one of the women in the Catholic Church. And Anastasia, are you saying no?
No, Anastasia is not related to Catholic Church. It's a folk tale of a slave woman that have their mouth shot with a metal piece for do not denounce her rapist. So it's a popular belief, but it's not. Of course, the Catholic Church don't like this. The Black Madonnas are not associated with race, but what the material, their material are black. They're made, the clay or the wood, whatever. And Catholicism is still, it is. If in the United States, your Catholic cult has elements of West African culture, it's their attempt to be more palatable to Black people, because Mass has been only done in the local languages of the different countries where Catholicism is after the council of John 23rd, right? The one that in certain way liberalized Catholicism. Catholicism until 1960 something, all the masses were done in Latin, where people wouldn't understand what was going on. And then they decided, okay, let's start to preach Mass in the local languages so people can be closer. So here in Brazil, since the advent of evangelical churches, Catholic too, they have music now, and music that to dance and stuff, because they're losing people.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
with all the
Exactly.
sovereignty.
That's the,
But
and
it
that's,
is a
like the point.
strategy.
The point is the strategy that there are religions that are fungible, right? The institution can change. And then also with that, I think there's a side that we haven't really discussed that we've been kind of touching on is social movements alongside these institutions, religious institutions. And my understanding is that Candomblé has like historically been connected to the Black social movement in Brazil as well. But, connected to not in the sense of an institution the way like the Black Baptist Church has been connected to the social movement in the US, but a different type of connection where folks who might be turned away from the church might find community of Candomblé and the social movements. Is that correct?
In great part, yes, it is. For example, the flavor of African American Christianity, where you guys talk to the spirits and dance and sing all of this, it is a version
Candomblé, yes,
of
absolutely.
Candomblé.
It is that
You know,
fusion, and the same
yeah.
thing with
No, it's a way of
Catholicism,
manifest that based on the prohibitions that
right?
they have in the U.S. So
I
it's
mean,
highly African.
if you go back to the early Christianity, the idea of the Holy Spirit, all of these things were not necessarily part of European Christianity. So it is that fusion. The same thing why Catholicism can be so appealing in Latin America is that people had orishas. So the idea that you have a pantheon of saints and you have spirit, and that people could see some connection.
No, the what you mentioned, ma'am, it's what calls religious syncretism.
Yeah.
So in Brazil was a strategy of the enslaved population of survival to associate the archetypes of the Candomblé with the archetypes of the Catholic saints. So in certain way, they were apparently like the crypto Jews did, or the new Christians that was forced to convert to Christianity, being Jews, as a form of being left alone, pretending they are worshiping the Catholic saints. For example, I mentioned those. There is a lot of brotherhoods of right that one that's very popular among African Americans is the Irmandade da Boa Morte, the Brotherhood of Good Death. That is in a city here in the interior of Bahia that every year come thousands, and every year more and more thousands of African Americans that comes, and there's a little community that start developing here. People, African Americans living in this city. So where forms of survival, like for example of capoeira, it is this form not showing yourself so hardly combatant, because if you show a fierce resistance, the tendency is of the dominant power to erase you. Where you are more flexible, or apparently like a coconut tree bends with the wind, and the oak tree with wind is too strong, it cracks and fall down. So those things are where strategies too, and strategies that I believe um, came in organical form, because there was not a meeting to say, oh, let's do that, or there is not an institution that directs that to happen. But for example, syncretism has been publicly renounced by Candomblé. I think in 1980s by Mãe Stella de Oxum, that
What
is,
do you mean?
she was the priestess of the temple of Ile Axelpo Afonja.
What does that mean, Yoji? Syncretism. That means no more trying to mask the Orisha with the
Yeah,
counterpart. Okay.
is the syncretism is the association. For example, Saint Barbara, that is associated with thunderstorms and things like that. In Candomblé, it's Yansan. So who and also has kind of same colors. So when we go, so there is the party of Santa Barbara in the church. Who really goes isn't the people who follows your son, you know. So then it's those ceremonies that see people washing the stairs of the church, because also they were not allowed to enter the church, but they are tolerated outside, you know. And it was a form of have less oppression upon them. So nominally, you know, we pretend to be Catholic, but we are not.
So, you know, let me sort of move this to back to the beginning and to move with it. This is a great conversation. Thank you, Yoji. Thank you, Dr. Irma. Thank you, Brenda. And thank you, Angela Rose. Wonderful conversation. I was going to put up, as you guys were talking, kind of what's in the back of my mind, and I've got a screen here to show that the question for me, though, this on the left side here is a picture of out of the article that Brenda wrote of the people Dr. Peterson is working with in South Africa, the clerics from different faith traditions, asking that they themselves hold themselves accountable to each other and to the community, to the parishioners, to children and to women and to men for getting rid of this idea of that it's okay to accept violence and abuse, or to commit violence and abuse against women and against children. So that's that picture. But alongside that, number 7 in this Africana Studies framework, this is something that I got from, you all see me talking about Nubia and narrative all the time, and they've posted this thing called the Africana Studies Framework. I want to go straight to question number 7, is how do it free us? And all of these conversations, to me, have to tie back to that question. How does the examination of the history, the examination of the potential, the strategies, how does that free us? And I think that we're heading in that direction. I just want to comment and thank all of you for the conversation. And so then back to Angela, you know, so if we identify, we analyze, we think about, you know, cite the perils of the twin evils of white supremacy and of patriarchy, how does that free us? Where do we and how do we, Dr. Irma, imagine, either out of history, out of studying, or out of innovation for the future, societies that do not depend on, do not deploy or use those institutions and systems of disadvantage? How do we break that and break out of it and in a sense, create a new space that dignifies, honors our dignity as human beings, all? Dr. Irma, what you think? Rose, what do you think?
I'll let Angela tackle that one. Let me think about that for a second.
Okay.
I think about mainly Audre Lorde's quote on you can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools. And when I think about what does it look like for Black women to survive and thrive in the future, I'm reminded that Black women are survivors, right? That we have survived and we will continue to survive. But the thriving under oppressive regimes and systems means at times expanding beyond the institutions that we do find small power in. And so this means to me, like, there are existing frames of institutions that we are now seeing. First Black woman college president, first Black woman dean of this, first Black PhD of this, or, you know, the like of like first Black woman police chief, XYZ. Yet, right, your question of how does it free all of us has to remain crucial, and creating new institutions that center the safety, the longevity of Black people, right? All Black people, because I'll also say that we've been focusing on Black women, particularly in this conversation, but we also recognize that patriarchy harms, kills Black men as well, right? And we understand that it's not even just a binary of the gender binary, but that our sex, gender is beyond two genders, right? And it's beyond, what we've kind of been conditioned to see as man, woman, right? And it's beyond what we've been conditioned to see as, heterosexual and homosexual. We're beyond that right now. And our spirituality and what we've been handed down from our ancestors. And so we can't rely on conventional ideologies, whether it be in institutions, whether it be religions, whether it be, police, whether it be, academia. We cannot rely on them to free us, from the oppressive institutions themselves. So, there's always a struggle, particularly in the NAACP, particularly activists. Do you change the institution within, or do you burn it down, right? And there's always folk who are working the inside-outside game, right? There's folk who are always going to be inside finding power for us. And there's always going to be folk outside who are building and creating new things while they're burning it down, right? While they're trying to go against the institution. And it's for us to realize that our community's existence in the future depends on making sure that while we are changing and while we are burning things down, we are not burning us down. We are not burning our people down. We're not bringing our people down. If we are invested in changing a system, make sure that you change it so actually it's not going to be so excruciating for another young person behind you to come up, right? So you're not a gatekeeper then once you're inside and you've made it, right? And you're actually making it more equitable once you're in. And if you're outside that, you're not actually actively burning down opportunities for the folks that you see are complacent within the systems. But I personally believe we need to build new systems that center Black women, center Black people, and center our futures. But I also understand the skills to do that comes through actually being within institutions as well. And actually you can get these skills in so many different ways throughout life. And they're often devalued. They're often, they often create soul wounds on you and your community when you're trying to reach a capitalistic, height, mountaintop, so it's a little bit of an on and on and on. It's like, there's so many things against us, but what we can always do is focus on healing generational traumas, actually seeing people for who they are, the value that they inherently have, and building our future, not locked within a mindset of ethnocentricity that Yoji brings, not locked within a navel gazing within a church or within a job or within a particular place, is to actually say, how does this free us? But also how, once we are free, will we thrive? So that's kind of how I feel around it.
Before you respond, Dr. Irma, I just want to acknowledge Yoji. You clarified something for me when you described the generational regeneration of Candomblé, that unlike Catholicism, it is not a church, but a practice, and does not have a hierarchy, as I understand it, unless I'm understanding it wrong, you can correct me, or doesn't have a hierarchy like that of the Catholic or of European or Western religions. So there is a difference in institutions set up that sort of protect and preserve and perpetuate themselves, but a practice in Candomblé that's really personal, but real enough that everyone who is invited and discovers and participates in it is aware of the scope, the range, the depth, and the protocols of the practice and the meaning, the philosophies that guide them and the outcomes that they should deliver. That's kind of what I hear you saying. Maybe I'm overreacting, but with that, Dr. Irma, what are your thoughts? And I'll come back to you, Yogi and Brenda. We got a few extra minutes, it's okay.
No, well, I just wanted to point to a piece I just put in. I wrote this back in 2012, and it was based on a talk that I had given maybe a year or so before. And the question it raises is, can we envision a world without violence against women? You know, and now we have a larger sector of not just women, but trans people. And I think that's the question. And for me, it is about, do we try and look for that question, which I think what Audre Lorde posed was a question. It wasn't a statement. She said, can we use? And when I think about writing, I say, yes, I can use the master's tools because it's the only language I know. It's the only thing I have available. So if I think that I can't transform it and utilize it, you know, to break down and deconstruct, then I'm not going to do anything. But for me, the question becomes, what are we teaching our children? Because we have to recognize that institutions come with a set of values and ways of thinking about the world, and our children are constantly exposed to it. They go to school, they're exposed to certain ways of seeing the world that may incorporate patriarchy, that may support violence against women. So what are we doing in our homes as parents, as relatives, as siblings, to sort of give them the tools to challenge those kinds of views, to think differently about things, to imagine a new way or a new kind of relationship, whether it starts with how they treat their siblings, their children. If those children are trans, how do they treat them? And begin to sort of construct in the spaces that we can control an alternative view that may then yield to something. You know, I think looking forward, and Brenda, I want to speak to, you know, you were asking Yogi about, well, are there women who are at the head of this? I think we have to not confuse having someone, you know, be the leader or always at the top, that if we have more women, that somehow that's going to change things. We should know by now that legislation hasn't eliminated racism. You know, we should know by now that having a Black president didn't eliminate racism. You know, so we have to stop looking for these iconic things and start doing it on the level of what I appreciated what Yogi said, is that Contemplate is not an institution. It is a movement. It is a kind of community that people have agreed to in terms of how they see the world. And I think we need to get back to community building, as opposed to thinking that the structures are going to be the sort of pathway to transformation and change.
I think we need an image for our children, though, Dr. Irma. And if all they see are their mothers and no, you know, and then in the churches, no women, you know, then you.
Well, maybe the church is not the place. You know,
well, that
I think
be true, but it's just now in corporations for women to move up, and this is all we saw growing up. But we also saw powerful Black women who carved their way, even in
Brenda,
the 60s and 70s.
But I think we also have to support our children to have the imagination, to think outside of just what they see. I had to imagine myself going to college, growing up in a family where my father had a second grade education. My mother had dropped out of high school. There was no one around me. But I had the space to be able to imagine something different. I'm not saying what you're arguing is not important. Yes, it's great to have role models. But in the absence of role models, are we also saying that people can't imagine something different? That's what I'm talking about, is let's begin to cultivate our children to imagine a world that is different from what they are necessarily seeing, and that they can create something differently. And
but they don't see it in school, though.
But maybe we need to start making sure that their perspective is not just American centered, that they start
That's
looking
true.
internationally, that they can see that there are other places and spaces that are outside the United States, you know.
I would like to do an interjection.
Go ahead.
Since we mentioned I haven't seen the movie yet, The Woman King, right? But this verse about the Dahomey woman army. So, can we imagine a world without violence in general?
That is a
Is that
question,
possible?
yes.
Not when you have
Without
more
war,
guns than you
without
do people.
disputes? Huh?
Not when you have more guns than you do people in the
No,
United
but I think
States.
that's inherent
Maybe
to the
not
nature of.
outside of us, but
I think that's inherent of the nature of human being, the tendency of to violence. You know, it's still our animal instinct. In a way or the other, we are capable of being violent. You know,
I
I
would say
myself,
that
I have received in the U.S. I was the receiving end of domestic violence perpetrated by women. You know, and that's why many times I'm very skeptical, close to cynical about all these statements, because my personal experience, then I'm not projecting towards other, but my personal experience, it is are those, you know. So, but then I will think in the larger world, it is the possibility uh, to the existence of a world without violence. So, you know, I find it difficult because, you know, violence arrives when we lack words to articulate our feelings.
violence arrives when there is a want of dominance over, over resources as well, right? And so I think that one of the difference is the type of violence that women as a group face, how trans women face. It's disproportionate, right? Like there was over 350 trans women who were shot, murdered in the US in 2021. And this is a disproportionate level of violence that Black trans women see compared to other groups. And the dominant factor is this dominance that is the factor is that if in capitalist society, in a patriarchal society, if your body is not viewed within the reproduction mechanism, right? Or even the mechanism of beauty, quote unquote beauty, that is Eurocentric, that is heteronormative, then your body becomes a threat to society. And that's what a lot of Black women face, is that our bodies, and this actually brings us to the beginning of the conversation, us existing, right? And a lot of times this will happen with Black men too, but the aspect of Black men body is seen as aggressive is that they're aggressive, but that power is seen as, in the history of slavery, as powerful and can produce something, right? Then that's why it's okay to be a big Black guy if you are in the NFL, because you're a defensive lineman and you're going to get paid millions of dollars, but people are making billions of dollars off of your body. Right. Whereas for Black women, being seen as aggressive, being seen as hyper masculine, this is a threat, because then what is the labor value of your body? Same. If you're not reproducing strong Black men, right? That's the quote. What is your labor value? And this is very underlying to what misogynoir is, right? And what aspects of the want of domestic violence is a want to dominate the other person. And that's why it is not just domestic violence in the sense of a gender dynamic, but there are so many folks in our communities that have soul wounds. And this idea of a soul wound is beyond the individual. It's and shared throughout community, that we have been so beaten down. We have epistemologically been annihilated from the knowledge of our ancestors, right? And the only way that folks can handle that type of generational historical trauma is through action of violence. So my proposal to you is not how can we get to a world without violence, but how can we get to a world where the violence isn't predicated on dominance the same way. I think that unfortunately we might not get to that place where you won't see violence, right? But we do see conflict. We might see conflict.
That's twisting me a little bit, Angela.
Okay, we might see conflict, but conflict based in respect. So I think about it in the sense of what is it? The ancient Chinese philosopher and the ways of war. And then like this idea of ancient European wars where they would line up like this at dawn, right? And then they would say, okay, you move and you move. There was a principled nature to the violence, whereas that we can understand is fundamentally different. We can understand conflict, right? Where there's a winner, there's a loser, and it is over some type of principled issue, right? We can understand that type of violence over the senseless violence that is domestic violence, that is, the violence against refugees, against immigrants, against trans women. That is very senseless to me, and it's not really on the. It's a murky line. I agree that it's a murky line.
I kind of want to go where Yoji was raising the question. That is, if you say, we want to figure out, can this experience be one that does not have violence? Is that worth considering? And is that a possibility? Maybe you're saying it's not possible. And maybe you're saying that practical, Rose or Angela, is that we take pieces of it and fix those pieces at a time, that you doubt we'll ever get to the point of evolving to the elimination of violence as a characteristic of our existence. But Yoji is saying, why don't we go there? Can we imagine? And what do we need to do to move in that direction? Am I right, Yoji, or wrong?
Yes. Listen, I went to school here in Brazil, to a military school of the army. And it's where really I start to begin learning to be a critical thinker. And paradoxically, in a military school, I had a teacher of history who told me the lesson was about French Revolution. And I think I don't know if it was René Descartes or Robespierre. I think it was Robespierre who said, and I'll find, wow, the phrase was, the world only be the world that we desire to be when the last priest be hanged with the tribes of the last military. So I leave that for you guys to think.
We're going to leave the show right there as well.
Possible?
I think
There's a mic
we'll
drop
stop
there.
right there. Okay. Listen, I'm Al McFarlane. This is
Big food for thought.
A mic drop.
And we'll see you all.
Thanks, Yoji.
Take care, everybody.
Hey, peace. May the Orishas give you power.
I know.
As
Thank
you
you.
already have.
Ashe.
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 Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.